Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me if you're here with me or if you're watching this afterwards on YouTube. Thanks for watching. We're going to go ahead and continue our study into the Scarlet Letters. I have it here up on the screen, but if you have it for yourself, we are on letter number 7. Emma, hello. How are you today? Hope you're doing well. As I always say, this is just my attempt to kind of delve in, hopefully pull out something that's just a little bit more than the standard surface reading. Hopefully, enrich lives. Maybe kind of help you think a little bit if you're on your own journey spiritually. So please, by all means, if you're watching this live with us or if you're watching it afterwards, go ahead and leave comments as you have thoughts. Always love to hear what people are thinking. Even if you think I'm an idiot, if you think I'm totally wrong, feel free to just shout that out too. I don't pretend to be anybody that's brilliant in this. Hello, Snow. How you doing? I'm doing good, thank you. I've had a busy week, but a good week. It's been very, very enriching. All right. So we're going to go ahead and jump on into this. As I have mentioned before, just keep in mind, if you haven't read this before, this is Lewis's letters sent from a demon in hell to his nephew, and it's to explain the way that demons will often try to trip you up in your life so that you don't come to God. So keep in mind whenever he talks about all of this, this is from a demon's perspective, so God is the enemy. Just something that if you don't keep in mind, it'll be a little bit confusing as we go through this, but just take note of that. My dear Wormwood, I wonder you should ask me whether it's essential to keep the patient ignorant of your own existence. That question, at least for the present phase of the struggle, has been answered for us by the High Command. So this is basically a point at which Wormwood has, in some regard, we don't obviously see Wormwood's correspondence here, but in some capacity, he's implored his uncle to say, hey, can we reveal ourselves to the humans? Can we actually be open and out? And Screwtape is responding, hey, you know our rules for the present are we can't do that. And I like that Lewis actually tackles that, because the demons do evolve in how they are fighting the battles, because it's not as perhaps open and out in the direct, at least commonly. It still happens in some cases, but it's not as common for them to be out in the open in the way that they were biblically. And part of that is just that because it's far more beneficial for them not to be. It's an old quote at this point that one of the devil's greatest tricks was convincing the world he never existed. Well, that's something that still kind of holds true for us today. They get at us best by making sure that we don't think about them. I think almost any person, if you're any level of rational, and you see somebody, running towards you, screaming his head off about how he's got 1,000 demons in him and he aims to, chop you up and kill you, you would think, okay, well, that guy is clearly somebody I need to not be anywhere around. So it's just one of those things that obviously be great just to make sure that it's one of those things that, you have to keep in mind. It's just the demons don't approach things openly as they always have. It is worth mentioning that there will, of course, come that time when it does happen, but that's towards the end times, which, of course, we're getting closer and closer to each day. Our policy, for the moment, is to conceal ourselves. Of course, this has not always been so. We are really faced with a cruel dilemma. When the humans disbelieve in our existence, we lose all the pleasing results of direct terrorism, and we make no magicians. And that's kind of what I was referencing earlier. If, again, you've read any biblical story, you'll see all these people that are openly practicing demonic arts. Over and over again, that's referenced to practicing demonic magics and arts. And there was a time whenever that was commonly understood not to just be something that was done, but even was something that did have a modicum of power, which I use in great massive quotations. But my evidence for that is actually throughout Exodus. If you end up reading how the Egyptians responded to the miracles of God, they weren't surprised that Moses and Aaron did miraculous things. They were surprised whenever their miracles overcame the power of their gods. Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying. Yeah, the goal is honestly just that even if just a few people gain something out of the stream, that would be wonderful. I certainly don't hope to gain anything for it out of myself. But yeah, Definitely, I think the summoning of the state. Sorry, if I could use words, that'd be great. The summoning of the snake from the staff is one of the biggest examples. They weren't at all surprised. There's no take back that they're able to do that. They're surprised whenever the snake eats their snakes. That's whenever they were like, "Oh, hold on, this is something real." And that's because the demons were just far more openly prevalent. Now, of course, you do still have satanic worshippers and people that practice magics today, but these days they're seen far more as an outcast, even by unbelievers, as opposed when what you would consider magics or powers or whatever you want to call it, back then was something that was just an open practice. So as he's saying, in their hidden form, they make no magicians and they don't have direct terrorism. On the other hand, when they believe in us, we cannot make them materialists and skeptics. And that's kind of what he's hitting on here. If people openly acknowledged that demons were real, which of course Christians do, but if the wider world agreed that demons were real, it would push the spiritual to the forefront of their mind, and they would be unable to deny the evidence of, the afterlife and everything like that, and would largely, not necessarily entirely, there are people that would just say, yeah, there are demons, but there is no God, but people would be forced to acknowledge that there is something to this afterlife phenomenon, and how, one of Satan's greatest works is the wide spread of quote-unquote atheists, even though that's not really the appropriate term for it, but just the people that refuse to believe there is anything. And if demons were openly rampant in the world today, I think that would be something that would be a lot harder for people to deny. At least, not yet. I have great hopes that we shall learn in due time how to emotionalize and mythologize their science to such an extent that what is, in a sense, a belief in us, though not under that name, will creep in while the human mind remains closed to the belief in the enemy. Just highlight there, that's something it's something that is a little bit, trying to think of the word for it. it's written in an older tongue, so that's something that I think deserves to be a little bit picked apart. Screwtape's hopes here is that science will become something that is almost mythical in its practice, so that throughout time, the human mind will accept the mythology that is present in the science without considering God. And that's something that we do to such an extent. And that's something really, we've kind of hit that point in stride. Science is something that is borderline a myth, not in that it's true, but in the way that we accept everything that comes from the science, even when so much of it is theoretical. And you'll find that if you study broader science, especially science around space, you'll realize how, like, every 3 years they come out and they go, oh, this thing we thought for all this time turned out not to be true. Which I'm not belittling them for that, because we have no way of knowing. We can't go there and look at it, obviously. But the idea that everything that comes from a scientific source is undeniably true ends up becoming a form of demon worship. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that all science is evil. That's not what I'm getting at. But just whenever you elevate your science to godhood, that is a form of demon worship. And unfortunately, a lot of people in our lives do. How often have people tried to disprove God with science? That's one of the major things that happens. Now, of course, I'm not saying that's necessarily true of all of it. There are, of course, Christian scientists and people who are trying just to genuinely understand the way things work. I'm not talking about that. The life force, the worship of sex, and some aspects of psychoanalysis may here prove useful. The life force was something that was coming out of, I believe it was part of the study of psychology during Lewis's day, and it was something that he poked fun at quite a bit, I believe, in his books, Mere Christianity, as well as The Four Loves. I believe he poked quite a bit of fun at it, and their view of things. I haven't read those for a hot minute, so I could be off on those. But I haven't read Four Loves yet, but Mere Christianity has been a hot minute, so I need to read back up on that. Maybe we'll turn that into a study someday. But that's why Lewis is quoting life force. If once we can produce our perfect work, the materialist magician, the man, not using, but veritably worshipping what he vaguely calls forces while denying the existence of spirits, then the end of the war will be in sight. Well, tell me if that's at all topical today. Do we have people today that genuinely believe in vibes and forces out there? Oh, but you don't call it spirits. Even they do have things they call spirits, but that's not what you think of when you think of the spirit. It's not what you think of when you think of the human spirit or of the spirit of God. They just believe in spirits in the sense of like ghosts, which of course are also demons. So the reality is that it without meaning to, it's something that has totally turned into a form of demon worship. But in the meantime, we must obey our orders. I do not think you will have much difficulty in keeping the patient, that's the person that this wormwood is attempting to draw away from God, in the dark. The fact that devils are predominantly comic figures in modern imagination will help you. If any faint suspicion of your existence begins to arise in his mind, suggest to him a picture of something in red tights. Persuade him that since he cannot believe in that, it is an old textbook method of confusing them, he therefore cannot believe in you. Well, I mean, you tell me today, do we have these comical depiction of devils and demons? Perhaps even the other realm, where we've transformed them into be something edgy and cool. Yeah, that's rampant throughout our media, and that's not going anywhere. I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into this here just because that's something that could be picked apart for a whole other day. The show Ironheart, which recently came out under Disney, despite from just being a horrible show altogether, one of the main storylines of that is that she makes a deal with demons to power her Iron Man suit. That's literally a huge plot line of that show. I mean, you can't look at that and tell me that that's not a demon-affected thing. Now, I'm sure the creators don't think of it that way. I'm sure they're sitting there going, oh, well, this was, the Mephisto and all these demons were from the comics. Okay, sure. But that doesn't change the fact that what you're literally doing is pointing out how people can use demons to get what they want. You could dress it up in a fantastical element all the same. It's still a form of demon worship combined with science. It's literally what Lewis is talking about here. I have not forgotten my promise to consider whether we should make the patient an extreme patriot or an extreme pacifist. Lewis, of course, at this point is talking about the world war that was taking place and how both extremes can ultimately become something that overtake your personality and your rational mind so that you end up becoming somebody who is just totally devoted to that over the spirit and over God. All extremes, except extreme devotion to the enemy, God, are to be encouraged. I just talked about that. Any extreme that overtakes your devotion to God will draw you farther away from him. It doesn't matter if you want to call it a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't even matter if it's something that morally people might agree with, that even people in the church might agree with. If that overtakes your devotion to God, it is now something that is distracting you. It's very easy to do. Even in ministry, actually, this is something that gets easy. It becomes easy to love serving God more than you love God. That was one of the earliest things I've read from an author that actually stuck out to me. It's a trick I myself find myself falling into whenever I get very excited, is I want to do everything. I want to give all I have to God. And if I'm not careful, I actually let that get in the way of my taking time to have a relationship with God. So anything, no matter how you might want to say it's a good thing, if you let it get in the way of God, is now something that is pulling you further away. All extremes except extreme devotion to the enemy are to be encouraged. Not always, of course, but at this period. Some ages are lukewarm and complacent, and then it is our business to soothe them, yet faster asleep. That's something that kind of people have gotten into a lot when they talk about how one of the things that is the quickest to make Christianity a lukewarm thing in places is whenever it is just a casual, commonly accepted thing. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but whenever Christianity is not allowed somewhere, in particular, I'm thinking of when Christianity was banned from Russia, the sects of it that were in Russia were extremely, extremely focused. They were absolutely people that were on fire for God. And once Christianity became legal, it certainly didn't die out, but it didn't have that same zeal behind it. And that's something that kind of always holds true. So as good as it is, it also is kind of something that's bad for the church to be openly, commonly legal. Now, obviously, I'm not advocating that Christianity should be illegal in any sect. I'm not supporting that at all. But it is simply a matter that complacency breeds just this lack of focus and desire. Any small country bound together by some interest which other men dislike or ignore tends to develop inside itself a hothouse of mutual admiration, and towards the outer world a great deal of pride and hatred, which is entertained without shame because the cause in its sponsor is thought to be impersonal. So Lewis is, in so many words, kind of pointing out that whenever you have any sort of cause, regardless of whether it's one that should be seen as noble or not, that can quickly overtake your sense of personality and individuality. And then the cause becomes what is at the first and foremost aspect of your mind. And it creates this self-aggrandizement, intentional or not. Anytime you have this attitude of that you're part of an elite group or anything, that's a self-aggrandizing process. It's one of the things, because I've had the chance to preach a few times, and it's been a wonderful blessing. I always feel very awkward when somebody comes up to me and tells me that I did a good job. I appreciate the sentiment behind it, but I try to be very careful not to get a big head about it, because it's really not anything I did. I just try my best to let God speak through me and to make it his message. And so it's always very weird to me to be congratulated on a message. Even though I understand where the sentiment is coming from and what the thought behind it is. And as much as I appreciate that, it's one of those things I have to be exceptionally careful that I don't take pride as if I've achieved something personally. We want the church to be small, not only that fewer men may know the enemy, but also that those who do may acquire the uneasy intensity and the defensive self-righteousness of a secret society or clique. We were just talking about that. And that's something that, if you're not careful, it can expend to the church. This is where you get the whole behavior of holier than thou art, which unfortunately does permeate some individuals. And it's, upon meeting such people, I would highly encourage them to take a look at their connection and their relationship with the Father. The whole point of the Christian walk is that we are not capable of saving ourselves. If we were, we wouldn't need Jesus. We've done nothing by our own value. But nevertheless, whenever you escape the shackles of the world by coming to God, it creates this freeing air. And if you're not careful with the way you absorb that, and especially with the way you present that, it can either create, or at the very least, create the impression of this self-righteousness that Lewis is discussing here. The church herself, mind you, the church is speaking of the collective church, the bride of Christ, is of course heavily defended, and we have never yet succeeded in giving her all the characteristics of a faction. But subordinate factions within her, mind you, speaking of the thousands of different factions of Christianity that exist, have often produced admirable results. Mind you, again, admirable is speaking for the demons, not for Christ. From the parties of Paul and the Apollos at Corinth down to the high and low parties in the Church of England. Mind you, this was during Lewis's day. America is perhaps an even greater example of that, how we have, Calvinists and Lutherists and Nazarenes and, even just down to the split between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. Not that I don't take issue with some of the Catholic teachings, but that's not the point. The point is that the denominations have got us into this almost inner war that is the church, which is very unfortunate, because the reality is that as long as you are saved under Christ, we're all part of the same bride. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but we're never going to. We are all individuals. And as none of us are totally, utterly enlightened to the point of being the Christ, we're not going to agree on everything. Some of us are going to see things differently. But there's a total difference between, hey, I disagree with you, and hey, I hate you because we've come to this point of disagreement on doctrine. That's one of the reasons why I say I am a non-denominational Christian. Because my goal isn't to ascribe myself to a doctrine of man. My doctrine is the Bible, and that is what I follow first and foremost. You know, any individual issue you want to bring up, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to share my understanding of it as through my understanding of the Bible and through my understanding of God. And it's even possible that as my understanding of those things increases, I might change my view on it. But ultimately, no matter what, my doctrine is always, always going to be God first. Not any man, any church's doctrine. Now, mind you, I'm not saying that because I disapprove of church as an organized religion. I think having a church that you attend, that you grow in, and that you serve in is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it's something that's very helpful in your journey. But you can't let that religion and that doctrine overtake your relationship with Christ. That always has to be first and foremost. If your patient can be induced to become a conscientious objector, mind you, he's talking to the World War, he will automatically find himself one of a small, vocal, organized, and unpopular society. And the effects on this, on one so new to Christianity, will almost certainly be good. Mind you, again, when he says good, he's talking for the demons. Now, I'm not going to harp on it a huge amount, but there is a political group today. There are several political groups today, actually, that popularize that idea that you become part of this small, vocal, and organized and unpopular society because the world doesn't understand you. And they use that to be especially vicious. And one of their primary targets every single time is the church. Because the church says, hey, you're not perfect, but you can come here and be reborn and made anew. Whereas these groups often say, no, you should just be who you are naturally, and we should bend over to try to make everything work for that. And it's these two conflicting ideologies. But reality, what it is it's Satan trying to convince you that the church doesn't love you and doesn't like you, and therefore you need to attack it. That's why shootings happen in churches. That's now it's not always from the same base, but ultimately it is. You know, it might come from many different whatever afflictions or oppressions the person is suffering, but it always comes from that same base desire of Satan to tear down the church. But only almost certainly has he had serious doubts about the lawfulness of serving in a just war before this present war began. Is he a man of great physical courage, so great that he will have no half-conscious misgivings about the real motives of his pacifism? Can he, when nearest to honesty, no human is ever very far? I would actually disagree with us on that. Some people are rather far from their honesty. I won't harp on that too much. As I have said, of course, it's important to understand this is Lewis's writing, not scripture. No human is ever very far. Feel fully convinced that he is actuated wholly by the desire to obey the enemy, God. If he is that sort of man, his pacifism will probably not do us much good, and the enemy will probably protect him from the usual consequences of belonging to a sect. One of the greatest real-life examples I can easily point to, and that is the service of Desmond Doss, who was, of course, he was a conscientious objector, although he wouldn't use that term. I believe he liked to call himself a conscientious cooperator, and ended up serving as a medic, both in Guam and, of course, more famously on Hacksaw Ridge, where he rather famously refused to carry a weapon, but ended up saving an insane number of lives because he willingly ran into hellfire, and it was because he had such a strong devotion to God that he was protected. I mean, there are stories after story after story where that man should have died, and yet he seemed to have some otherworldly cloak over him that would keep him from actually being killed until he eventually passed away, I believe, in 2006? Somewhere around there. Um, but yeah, if somebody is truly devoted to God first, both their pacifism or their patriotism will not necessarily benefit Satan, because again, God is overtaking all else. Your best plan in that case would be to attempt a sudden, confused, emotional crisis from which he might emerge as an uneasy convert to patriotism. Mind the word uneasy there. Now, I don't support what I would call blind patriotism. I think that can just as easily waylay somebody from Christ. But being a patriot under Christ, serving your country under God, is something I think it can be a wonderful thing. Such things can often be managed. But if he is the man I take him to be, try pacifism. Mind you, that's talking of the specific patient of Wormwood's. Whichever he adopts, your main task will be the same. Let him begin by treating the patriotism or the pacifism as part of his religion. Then let him, under the influence of the partisan spirit, come to regard it as the most important part. We just tackled that over and over again. It's not just that it's intertwined with the religion, it's that it supersedes his relationship with God. Then, quietly and gradually, nurse him onto the stage at which the religion becomes merely part of the cause, in which Christianity is valued chiefly because of the excellent argument it makes, the excellent argument it can produce in favor of the British war effort or of pacifism. Mind the way that they are wording these attacks here. Now, Christianity is serving a man-made desire and a man-made concept. That's what Lewis is warning against here. It's not necessarily that those ideas and concepts are bad, but if they supersede your relationship to God, if they supersede your relationship with the groom, that's when they become evil. The attitude which you want to guard against is that which is in which temporal affairs are treated primarily as material for obedience. Basically saying that everything that will attack you on earth is a chance for you to turn it to God. That's one of the things that will drive demons the most crazy, because that's something that they can't then trick you out of. Once you have made the world an end and faith a means, you have almost won your man. And it makes very little difference what kind of worldly end he is pursuing, provided that meetings, pamphlets, policies, movements, causes, and crusades matter more to him than prayers and sacraments and charity. He is ours. And the more religious, on those terms, the more securely ours. I can show you a pretty cage full down here. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. This is perhaps one of the biggest letters, I think, that Lewis really hit here, especially this part at the end. It's so easy to conflate spiritualism and religion, because spirituality will often breed a religious practice. And that's not a bad thing. Religion is part of a devotion, and devotion is a part of spirituality. But to conflate the two makes them interchangeable. And when someone is religious, but their spirit is dull or dead, then they're merely serving the practice. They're merely following tradition. This is basically the place that Israel found themselves in whenever Christ came down. And it's why they got all upset every time he did something that went against their long-standing tradition. Because instead of actually focusing on the Christ, instead of focusing on the groom that was right in front of them, they had themselves wrapped up in their traditions. And, well, you can't do that. One of my favorite examples of that is the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. There's this man who's been born blind, and he heals him. And everyone's freaking out, saying, who could have healed this man? Instead of saying, clearly, because they knew better. Only the Messiah could heal the people born blind. That was one of the prophecies. there were people who perhaps could heal people that have become blind, but only a man born blind would be healed by the Messiah. Or sorry, the Messiah could heal a man born blind. And so instead of having that telltale sign right in front of them and saying clearly this must be the Messiah, they grew angry because they were so focused on their religion that they had no spirituality. So that's one of the things I always warn against whenever people talk about religion. Religion is not a bad thing. Religion is a tool. It's something that can be misused to breed the exact wrong efforts. Religion, if it's focused around your spiritual connection to the Lord, is a wonderful thing. But if it supersedes that connection, it could not be more damaging. And that's how you get religious movements bearing the name of Christ that actually do not have Christ in them. I'm sure you could point to any name you want on that. We all know the kind of people we're talking about. The people that they hold the Bible and they say some of the right buzzwords, but there's no love of God in them. I'm going to move on down to, what is this, letter 8? I'm going to grab some more coffee first. Sorry, I don't know if you can see it in my face or not. That's not as bad now. When I started streaming, I had giant bags under my eyes that I get from having a horrible sleeping schedule. Letter 8. My dear Wormwood. So you have great hopes that the patient's religious phase is dying away, have you? I always thought that the training college had gone to pieces, since they put old Schlobgob at the head of it. Mind you, now he's talking about training that demons receive in order to do what they do, because Schlobgob is one of the demon names. And now I am sure, has no one ever told you about the law of undulation? I could explain that, but I also have Google open on a tab here, so let's just have them define it so I don't make an ass out of myself by poorly explaining it. Hello? Undulation. The act of moving smoothly up and down, the act of rising. Okay, yeah. So basically, yeah, just the act of smooth transition, I guess we could say in this example. Humans are amorphians? I don't know exactly how you're just supposed to say that word. I know what he means by it, but I just don't know how you say that. Amorphians? Amorphians. I feel this way whenever I come across a really complicated name in the Bible. I'm just like, person. Half spirit and half animal. The enemy's determination to produce such a revolting hybrid is one of the things that determined our Father to withdraw his support from him. Now, Lewis is actually directly taking from Scripture here. We are flesh, but we also have the Spirit of God in us. Once we come to salvation, that Spirit is awakened. Then it is the Spirit and the flesh. And those two are going to war with each other for the rest of our lives here on earth. As spirits, they belong to the eternal world. But as animals, they inhabit time. Time, of course, being something that is present in our dimension, not beyond the scopes of our universe. But because we can't perceive a world without time, we often can't really grasp the meaning of that. That means that while their spirit can be directed to an eternal object, their bodies, possessions, and imaginations are in continual change. For to be in time means to change. This is also part of why God cannot exist in time, because if God were in time, he would change and he would not be God. That's one of the greatest struggles we have, is that our spirits are attempting to connect to the eternal and the perfect, while our bodies remain in this world that's spinning around super fast, and that's a tool that Satan uses. He loves the fact that things move so fast, and that there is so little time to really stop and be still. Their nearest approach to consistency, therefore, is undulation, the repeated return to a level from which they repeatedly fall back, a series of troughs and peaks. We could stop and break that down, but I believe most of this letter is actually directed towards that concept, so we'll let Lewis continue on. If you had watched your patient carefully, you would have seen this undulation in every department of his life. His interest in his work, his affection for his friends, his physical appetites, all go up and down. As long as he lives on Earth, periods of emotional and bodily richness and liveliness will alternate with periods of numbness and poverty. We've all experienced that. In your spiritual walk, that's perhaps one of the greatest things you'll notice is you have points where you're in it, you're on fire, you're running forward, and then you'll have points where it feels like everything is just rolling you right back down the hill. It's a very difficult thing to try to learn a consistent walk. Instead, we get stuck in these processes of sprints and fallbacks. The dryness and dullness through which your patience is now going are not, as you fondly suppose, your workmanship. They are merely a natural phenomenon which will do us no good unless you make a good use of it. Mind you, again, this is demons seeking to use this opportunity of slide back that the patient is suffering from. To decide what the best use of it is, you must ask what use the enemy wants to make of it, and then do the opposite. Now, it may surprise you to learn that in his efforts to get permanent possession of a soul, he relies on the troughs even more than the peaks. And that's something that, again, biblically, that's said over and over again. Whenever you are low in spirit and soul, whenever you are struggling with any sort of adversity, you turn to God much, much faster because you don't have that supposed self-reliance that is our worldly standard. One of the greatest examples is illness. You know, in our first world status, we don't start praying when somebody gets sick. We grab medicine, we go to the hospital. That's our attitude towards, hey, I'm sick. Prayer doesn't even enter into it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you should neglect medicines and hospitals. That's not my point. My point is that because we have that self-reliance on hospitals and medicines, we don't have a reliance on God. But whenever you're brought low, whenever you have nothing else you can do, then it's very, very easy for you to come to God. Now, you'll do so broken, regretful, realizing how truly neglectful you've been, but God takes pleasure in the fact that you are then coming to him, not in a sadistic sense, but just in the sense that now you are truly seeking him. The reason is this. To us, a human... Oh, sorry. No, sorry, I had that right. To us, a human is primarily food. Our aim is the absorption of its will into ours, the increase of our own area of selfhood at its expense. But the obedience which the enemy demands of men is quite a difficult thing. Again, that's not just Lewis or the demon's point of view here. The Bible says that all over. That's why it is a difficult walk. That's why the gate into heaven is so narrow, is because it is not an easy thing. One must face the fact that all the talk about his love for men and his service being perfect freedom is not, as one would gladly believe, mere propaganda, but an appalling truth. He really does want to fill the universe with a lot of loathsome, man, that is a hard word to say, loathsome little replicas of himself. Creatures whose life on its miniature scale will be qualitatively like his own. I mean, this is even a demonic acknowledgement that is truly what God wants. He doesn't just say that. He truly wants us to echo him. He wants us to be like him in the way that Genesis refers to it. People take that to mean a physical characteristic, which is always funny to me once you understand that God is the spiritual. Why then would Genesis refer merely to a physical characteristic when it says that we are like God? No, it means that we are spiritually like God, or at least that we were before the fall of man. Not because he has absorbed them, but because their wills freely conform to his. We want cattle who can finally become food. He wants servants who can finally become sons. We want to suck in, he wants to give out. We are empty and would be filled. He is full and flows over. Our war aim is a world in which our Father below, meaning Satan, has drawn all other beings into himself. The enemy wants a world full of beings united to him, but distinct. And that is where the troughs come in. You must have often wondered why the enemy doesn't make more use of his power to be sensibly present to human souls in any degree he chooses and at any moment. And man, if that isn't something that people have tried to use to disprove God, oh, well, if he would only prove himself, I would believe. Well, no, you wouldn't. That is where the troughs come in. You must have often wondered. Oh, sorry, I just read that. But now you see that the irresistible and the indisputable are two weapons which the very nature of his scheme forbids him to use, merely to override a human will, as his felt presence in any but the faintest and most mitigated degree would most certainly do, would be, for him, useless. God does not want puppets. He wants people who willingly come to him. If he wanted puppets, we wouldn't need Earth. We wouldn't need this whole walk. We wouldn't have needed the garden. We wouldn't have needed Adam. We wouldn't have needed the forbidden fruit. We wouldn't have needed any of it. Because God could just make us that way. But God, in how much he loves us, does not want puppets. He wants people who choose him. He cannot ravish. He can only woo. His ignoble idea. That's an interesting word. I haven't heard that before. Ignoble? Ignoble? Oh, no. Basically, so to the demons, it's unnoble idea. Is to eat the cake and have it. The creatures are to be one with him and yet themselves. Merely to cancel them or assimilate them will not serve. He is prepared to do a little overriding at the beginning. He will set them off with communications of his presence, which, though faint, seem great to them. This is kind of talking when people are overwhelmed in the spirit, especially when they first come to God. You'll notice how utterly overcome they are in their emotions. With emotional sweetness, an easy conquest over temptation. But he never allows this state of affairs to last long. Sooner or later he withdraws, if not, in fact, at least far from their conscious experience. All those supports and incentives. He leaves the creature to stand up on its own legs, to carry out from the will alone duties which have lost all relish. Now, I'll actually put a little asterisk on Lewis's words there. He's not wrong strictly. The notation I would make there is that it's not by our own will. We get our will from God. That's the goal anyway, is that we get all our willpower from God. It's a mistake to rely solely on your own willpower, and that's something that Lewis actually points out, which is why I don't think he's mistaken here. I think he's just kind of slightly misworded his meaning. But you can't just try to overcome something purely by your own willpower. Because if you could, you wouldn't need Jesus. That's the whole point of that. So yeah, I don't think that Lewis is implying that. I think he means merely that there are points whenever we no longer feel the constant presence of God walking alongside us. There are points whenever we feel very alone in our walk. And I think that's what he's referring to, but I think he's just, because it's coming from the point of view of demons, he can't quite word it that way, so it just comes off just a touch awkward. Again, this isn't scripture, this is man-made writing, so it's fascinating, but it's also important just to take that tiny grain of salt with it. It is during such trough periods, much more than during the peak periods, that it is growing into the sort of creature he, God, wants it to be. Hence, the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him best. We can drag our patients along by continual tempting, but we design them only for the table. And the more their will is interfered with, the better. He cannot tempt to virtue as we do to vice. He wants them to learn to walk and must therefore take away his hand. And if only the will to walk is really there, he is pleased even with their stumbles. Do not be deceived, Wormwood. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring but still intending to do our enemy will, looks round upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he has been forsaken, but still obeys. That's the important part of that to take note of. Despite feeling alone, you persist and you continue to obey. Because you know you're not truly alone, you just know you can't see and feel him. And that's something I think we've all, found ourselves in that period of, is that crying, God, where are you? I can't see you, but I know what you need from me, and so I'm going to keep walking. But please just smooth out this road because it's getting really tough. But of course, the troughs afford opportunities to our side also. Next week, I will give you some hints on how to exploit them. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. And with that, that's where we're going to go ahead and bring things to an end for today. I hope you guys watching got something out of it. Hope you could, maybe take home a little nugget or two. If you're watching this later on, please go ahead and leave comments down below with your thoughts. Love to hear them, love to read them, love for us all to get a little bit of enlightenment and growth out of this. But until then, I love you guys, and I'll see y'all next time.